welcome to today's On This Day in Tudor History. I'm Claire Ridgway. I'm founder of the Tudor Society website and also the Anne Boleyn Files website, and author of several history books. I'm here every day of 2019 with an On This Day in Tudor History video, bringing you births, deaths, marriages, executions, horrific burnings, all sorts of things from the Tudor period. Now today I'm taking you back to the reign of King Henry VIII. For it was on this day in Tudor history, the 7th of March 1530, that Pope Clement VII wrote to King Henry VIII, forbidding him from marrying again and threatening the king with excommunication from the Catholic Church if he did go ahead and marry again. In the papal bull that was issued with this threat of excommunication, and that was to be fixed on the doors of churches in Rome, Bruges, Tournai and Dunkirk, and also towns in the Diocese of Terouanne. This papal bull stated that Queen Catherine of Aragon had complained to the Pope, she'd appealed to the Pope, and she'd complained that Henry VIII had boasted, notwithstanding the inhibition and mandate against him, that he would proceed to a second marriage. So that's what this threat of excommunication was for, because Queen Catherine of Aragon had appealed to the Pope that, Henry VIII was boasting that he was going to go ahead with a second marriage. Now, this was 8 months after the Blackfriars Legatine Court had been adjourned. This court had been set up to kind of try the king's case for an annulment of his first marriage, his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. And it had been adjourned, having failed to come to any conclusion regarding the case for an annulment. And that had been a huge blow for King Henry VIII. He fully expected the court to, do their job, to pass a sentence and to rule in his favour. So it must have been a shock for him when it was adjourned without making a decision, and a shock for him when Catherine decided to appeal directly to the Pope, and the Pope then sided with her. Now, the Pope's threat of excommunication, which was a big thing in those times, to be excommunicated from the Catholic Church, Henry VIII's beloved Catholic Church. Now, the Pope's threat, though, fell on deaf ears. Henry VIII was more determined than ever to put aside Catherine of Aragon and to marry the woman he did love, Anne Boleyn, and to have chance of having, a son and heir with her. He sent men to universities to canvass their opinion on whether his first marriage was indeed contrary to God's law. And then in February 1531, he claimed the title of sole protector and supreme head of the Church of England. Now, this then paved the way for the break with Rome and, of course, the English Reformation that resulted from that, and also for the annulment of Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon. In October 1532, Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn travelled to the English territory of Calais, and they met with Francis I, and who was the French king. And Henry VIII was able to get Francis's support for his union with Anne Boleyn. Francis offered to give Henry French protection against Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, who was, of course, Catherine of Aragon's nephew, and so sided with her. And Francis also sent a message to the Pope in support of Henry VIII and his plans for marriage. However, although Francis offered the couple his support, he did not expect Henry VIII to to take matters into his own hands, really, and to secretly marry Anne Boleyn before his first marriage had been properly annulled. Now, chronicler Edward Hall, whose chronicle is a brilliant primary source for the Tudor period, he dates Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn's secret marriage to the 14th of November 1532, St. Erkenwald's Day. And that was the day that Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn landed back at Dover after their visit to Calais, after they'd got Francis I's support. Now, we don't know whether this secret marriage really took place on that day, or whether it was perhaps some kind of exchange of promises, a betrothal. But it appears that something did happen then, because the couple did start cohabiting, living as man and wife, sleeping together from that point on. And Anne Boleyn was pregnant by the time of their next secret, more official marriage, which took place on the Feast of St. Paul's, the 25th of January 1533. So they'd spent all that time sort of saving themselves and not sleeping together, not risking pregnancy. But after seeing Francis I and gaining his support, they started to properly live together as man and wife and risked pregnancy, and Anne got pregnant. Now, Henry VIII's first marriage was finally annulled in May 1533, so he didn't wait for it to be annulled, even with that official secret marriage on St. Paul's Day. When the marriage was annulled, Henry's marriage to Anne was pronounced good and valid. And that was just in time, really, because this happened in May 1533, and she was crowned Queen at Westminster Abbey on the 1st of June 1533. Now, I talked about how all this was the, Henry VIII claiming the title of sole protector and supreme head of the Church of England paved the way for the break with Rome. Now, the break with Rome happened in quite a few stages. In March 1532, the Act in Restraint of Appeals began the first legal part of the process of the break with Rome. And then in 1533, we have the Act in Restraint of Appeals, which began the process of transferring the power of the Church in Rome to Henry VIII and his government. And that is seen as the real starting point of the English Reformation, where Henry VIII and his government took control of the church in England. Now, at this time, it was still the Catholic Church in England. We don't really have the proper Protestant Reformation starting until Edward VI's reign. Really, Henry VIII was just making his own version of the Catholic Church, putting himself in charge, believing that there didn't need to be another authority between him as king and God. He didn't need the Pope. All appeals to the Pope were prohibited by this legislation, and the king was made the final authority on all matters. Now, of course, Anne Boleyn's marriage to King Henry VIII would also be annulled. It was annulled on the 17th of May 1536, just 2 days before she was executed. And Henry VIII went on to marry another woman, Jane Seymour. He married her on the 30th of May 1536, 11 days after his second wife, Anne Boleyn, was executed. Now, Henry VIII had this threat of excommunication on this day in 1530, but he was finally excommunicated on the 17th of December 1538 by Pope Paul III. The final straw for the papacy had been Henry VIII's attacks on religious shrines in England, which he'd done as a kind of result of the dissolution of the monasteries. He'd attacked religious shrines, and the bells are ringing out for this attack on religious shrines. and one in particular he'd really destroyed and desecrated, and that was the shrine of St. Thomas Becket at Canterbury. And that the attack on the church, the attack on the monasteries, and these awful attacks on religious shrines were just the last straw for the papacy. Henry VIII had been disobedient. He'd done so many bad things, they thought, by this time, that he had to be excommunicated once and for all. So that's what happened on this day in history, the 7th of March 1530. Pope Clement VII wrote to King Henry VIII, forbidding him from marrying again and threatening him with excommunication if he did. And of course, Henry just said, I don't care, I'm getting married again. He didn't mind. Anyway, I'll be back tomorrow with another On This Day in History. You can just click there to subscribe to this channel. There are all sorts of videos on this channel. There's not just On This Day in History ones. There's ones on Anne Boleyn and the Boleyn family. There's Tudor cooking with Claire, lots of recipes in that one. There's all sorts, so do have a good browse. You can hit the bell to be notified as well of new videos. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye.